Welcome to our February edition of Ball Fields Blackboards. We're professors who have studied sports, but we're also sports fans. This is Craig, Dennis, Brian, and the many things going on right now. Most recently, the Olympics is over. I've been a lifelong fan of the Olympics. Started out in 1968, one of the first years I could really remember much detail watching the Olympics. So I've been a big fan ever since. Greg has told us he's not a big fan, but let me ask you, what if you had to pick, even with your limited interest in the Winter Olympics, what would be your...
Probably the bobsled would be the one thing I would sit down and watch, just because it's a timed competition, and there is I'm a racing fan, so that would be something that would draw my interest in. Unfortunately,
it's truly crazy.
Yes, I mean, it is.
I don't know if you saw the what's his name, I think the Today Show guy that went down, and then there was a separate video of Jason Kelsey at the Park City track going down, and all of them like that. Jace Kelsey said, the first two turns, that was cool. And there they're going, whoa, because the G-forces are tremendous. You know,
that would be the one thing that would probably draw me in. But unfortunately, the nights when I would turn on the television, that wasn't actually being featured. So it quickly lost my attention in the evening viewing.
Yeah, all the evening viewing was of the more artistic, athletic endeavors, which... I don't know, we would argue, I guess the two of us would argue, and you might agree or not, that those really aren't sports. They're judging art, as it turns out. And people love figure skating and whatever, ice dancing or what. It's not my thing. I don't like any of the sports, and that goes summer, winter, doesn't matter what, if the judges actually exclusively determine the outcome.
You made a good point when you and I were discussing this. NBC does a fantastic job with the replays, especially in the evening, but they place a lot of the personal interest stories on those evening sessions of the Olympics, and that's because that's the audience they have at the night for the night viewing. It's not necessarily for just strictly sports fans. They're wanting to bring in a much broader audience, a much more general audience. So if I'm turning it on, I want to see the bobsled, and they're doing a general interest story on somebody from whatever sport. That quickly loses me because I'm not tuning in for that. I'm tuning in for the competition.
No, I'm like you guys.
The evening broadcasts are not for sports fans.
Right. It's for a more general audience.
Right.
And that's the nice thing in the DVR era. Those of us who are sports fans, I could go watch this particular sport. I'm not just limited to the evening coverage. You know, it is interesting, figure skating, when you're married, you have two daughters and no sons, you're going to watch some figure skating. And over the years, even though, again, I don't love judged events, and I don't disagree that it's somewhere in between sports competition and art competition. But I will say pair skating, I mean, the level of athleticism and some of the things they do, I do actually enjoy pair skating.
Well, to say that it's not a sport is to not say it's not athletic.
The
athleticism involved.
It's
from something I have mild interest in the Summer Olympics, something like men's gymnastics. And I admire it just because of the strength, say the rings competition, the
crazy
strength and everything. Now, I still don't think it's much of a sport in the fact that at the end of it, some judge is like, well, his pinky toe was pointed outwards. That's a point. Look, you get up there on the rings and just do what that guy did. And
I will give ice skaters credit. They have tried to the extent you can, and you never can fully do this, but objectify some of the scoring. They go back and review, did they finish the spin, or did they, that sort of thing. Now, what I will say is, I'm not saying there's no athleticism, but it's pretty limited. The ice dancing, we joke at our household, the pair skaters have to be going, you got to be kidding me. You guys are going, that was all the stuff they're doing, the ice dancing, the wow stuff. That's the filler on pair skating. They're going, we just do that with our eyes closed. It's skating backwards,
I'm not sure what ice dancing is. I don't even know what you're discussing.
I know that it exists.
I honestly don't know what that means.
Well off,
okay, sorry.
So, Dennis, I think anybody who knows you knows what you really were into in the Olympics, but I'll let you say it.
A huge curling fan, and no,
that's me.
It was
me.
greatest hockey tournament ever. And I don't say that lightly. It was the greatest hockey tournament ever. The only thing that could have improved it is had politics not been involved and the Russians been there.
Yeah.
So had the Russians been involved, it would have been an absolute greatest ever. But it was the greatest hockey tournament ever. And I'm quite patriotic myself. And to watch, whether it be the U.S. team, the Canadian team, the Swiss team, the Swedish team, the Finnish team, the amount of patriotism they had themselves for their own countries and the rivalries they have. And it's overwhelming to me. And so a little bit of a soapbox here. I'm very much of a believer that if our country sends you to the Olympics, you are representing our country. And so if you're going over there with any intent of, well, I'm not here for my entire country, then you shouldn't go. And so the idea that people go over and with the USA uniform on or with any country's uniform and will bash their country while there, I have absolutely no respect for them.
No,
And so I just want to finish here. To watch the finals yesterday, and I'm, again, hugely rooting for the United States, yelling whenever the game ended, and to see the initial reaction whenever they asked the guy who scored the goal, how does this feel for you? And he's like, this isn't about me. This is about the USA and USA hockey and the group we have here and the fact that this represents the country. I mean, it almost made me teary-eyed and everything. I appreciate the fact that they were there for more than themselves. And that meant a lot. And in the same way, it's kind of gutting, although I was rooting for them to lose, and I'm glad that they had to suffer through it, to watch the Canadians, basically feel like they had let themselves, maybe others down. And
it's tough, and we've talked about this, I think maybe off camera last month. But, and you were saying you're not a big fan of the, well, if you don't win, you're a loser mentality that exists. But in hockey, and you're Canada, it really is. It's like UK basketball. You don't win it, you're a loser. There's really no in between. Silver, we were talking last night during the medal ceremony that my wife and I were commenting. You can just see it on their faces. In many sports, the individualist, hey, I was expected to finish 30th and I got a silver medal. They are excited. Canada, those players, they weren't excited. What you just said, though, I thought, this strikes me about the Olympics in general. It often is, and it differs by individual and sport, but it is a really neat thing. And I was thinking, getting NHL players back in it, I don't know if this helps spur interest in hockey or not, but I will say, seeing, here are guys who during the NHL season are competing with each other and may not like each other, but they pull together and they are, there was no fake celebration. These guys were ecstatic. It reminds me, Joe Carter, we've talked about my older colleagues and I over the years. There was no preening. There was no, oh, look how great I am. When he hit that grand slam in the World Series that year, like one of my colleagues said, he looked like he was a little leaguer coming around first base, clicking his heels together. And that's the way these guys were. I think about Scotty Scheffler a couple of years ago winning the Olympic golf, and during the medal ceremony, here's a guy who makes multi-million dollars a year, top of the professional golf world, and he has tears. It's a neat thing. It is amazing how many people putting on the national jersey.
It's not just the United States. There's a Swedish player that had lost the United States in the quarterfinals, and I swear he must have got on a plane like within 20 minutes after the game, because I saw an interview of him like a day and a half later. He was at the NHL team that he's associated with, Rink, and they're asking about his teammate, who's like one of his best friends on the team, who's Finnish, and like, are you rooting for the Finns to go ahead and progress so your buddy will? And he just, a series of bleeps and expletives, no. Like, he's Finnish, and there is no way I will ever root for the Finnish hockey team to do. And then paused, and he said, but when he's back, we're brothers. No. And I was like, that is
Well, because you have guys who are on
to me.
Canada and U.S. who are teammates on their NHL team. It's an interesting dynamic. You've already kind of mentioned the things that aren't favorite. I'm like you all, the judging. Yeah, and particularly I would say if I ask things you'd like to change, one of the things that would come to my mind would be a sport like ski jumping. Why there is any style points, just all right, if you touch the snow with anything but your feet and the skis, there's a deduction or it doesn't count. But it should just be, it'd be like having a long jump. Oh, we're going to judge how you looked in the air. I mean, it's silly. I don't know why they've never changed that.
So if I've got two things to say about the Olympics, here's my two negatives. One, stop trying to make up sports just so you can put them in the Olympics.
Yeah.
They had some mountaineering racing thing that I heard them say that the woman who was I think was a U.S. representative, had never done this until December.
Yeah.
Her first race in this was in December, and now she's in the Olympics. I'm like, come on, man. Now you're just making things up to
well,
have
and
stuff.
especially in the winter, there's already a small enough pool of people and countries who do some things, and then you narrow that even more.
It's already specialized enough.
Yes.
We don't have to get more specialized.
Yes.
Okay, and so now the small pool of things does make me agree in some ways with Craig in terms of lack of interest. When one guy wins every event that you have, cross-country skiing, it makes me question how much depth. Like, you can't imagine a track athlete who wins the 100 meters and then later on wins every other event, including the marathon. Like, it doesn't exist, right? Because of the depth of talent and the number of people that he would have to face and compete against. But one guy wins the sprint and their marathon event, and everything in between. I'm like, okay, is he just like the best of the 25 people that does this?
Although, being a geek all that's enough to know, look, in one way, country-wise, cross-country skiing is fairly specialized.
Sure.
But cross-country skiing isn't like mountaineering. Within those countries that are into it, and that's one reason nobody's ever done what he's done before, I hate to diminish a guy like Clay, but I mean, yes, there's something different about cross-country skiing versus running that speaks to what you're talking about. The sprint, you can do well in sprints, because this has always been the case. Guys can do well. You can call it sprint, but all cross-country skiing to some extent is still a distance event, would be my argument, I think.
Boy, I don't know that I would agree. I mean, I'm not sure that I would agree with that. There seems like a huge difference between 1,500 meters, which is their sprint, and 50K. That seems like a big difference, and it seems like there should be. If there was a lot of depth.
All I'm saying is their sprint. There's no equivalent of a 100-meter dash in cross country. The closest thing would be that their shortest would be more like a 1,500 meter. So
Yeah.
you got middle dip. But look, I don't want to argue too much about that. I will say, now, Dennis hasn't seemed to be as into it lately because it hasn't been on TV as much in the U.S. But he and I both over the years have followed biathlon.
Yes.
And the biathlon competition I thought was excellent. The venue is gorgeous, and there was a variety of France kind of dominated both men and women in many ways, but there were some cool stories in that. And no, it does always amaze me. I've heard this before, but they mention it again. Biathlon is the most watched winter sport in Europe. Often I think U.S. people who rarely see it think, well, this is kind of odd. But I think people, if they would let themselves watch it, it really is very engaging because it's back and forth. The shooting element, I'm not that drawn into cross-country skiing, but you combine it with shooting, it makes it a whole different thing.
I would completely agree that people who like sport, racing of any type of thing, like those type of things, would really like it when we're talking about the ones that are first to the finish. Any of those races that are first to the finish. There's some that are time trials.
Yeah,
in essence,
those are, you have to be, that's an acquired taste.
Right.
Yeah.
You have to have some working knowledge and understand what's going on. Because it's very difficult. So, the person who starts 20th might be the person who finishes third, because the person who started 67th actually goes faster than they do. It's a time trial. So it's quite different. But the first to the finish type of thing, I think many people, if they gave it a chance, would really like biathlon.
Yeah. We keep trying to convince Craig, but he's
never seen
resisting.
it. So never.
But again, I
couldn't tell you a rule, or
if we forced him to watch one of them, he would like, all right, I get it. You at least you'd understand why other people like it, that kind of thing. So.
Well, and the level of skill at shooting, even though I've watched it over the years, I came to a greater appreciation this year. I didn't realize, I texted Dennis this, I did not realize they didn't use any magnification in their sights. It's just eyeball. And the target is, 60 yards away? 50. And in the laying down prone shooting, the size of the target is about the size of a golf ball. And then if you're standing, it's about the size of a DVD. I mean, those are pretty small targets when you're huffing and puffing and at your cardiovascular limit. It really, the level of shooting skill is really something. Combining that with,
I agree.
Well, we could go on and on about the Olympics. Let me bring up another topic that has arisen here lately. I mean, this has been an issue the NBA has been dealing with for years. And it's endemic to when you're trying to push competitive balance with things like a reverse order draft, but tanking, as it's referred to, teams intentionally trying to lose games, has become rampant. And not just rampant in the NBA. You used to maybe see it for the last month. Now you see it the last 2/3 of the season. And that Commissioner Adam Silver, he's been talking, I've been looking, I'm not sure these incentives are really what we want. This reverse order draft based on losing helps you. Oh, first question, why do you think this is worse? You see this, and I've seen it increasingly, even with NFL sites, where they're going, well, why are they starting? They need to lose this game. I used to never hear that. But it does seem to be much worse in the NBA. Why do you think it's worse in the NBA?
Go ahead.
I was going to say, for one, I'm not sure it's impacting crowds. I don't think the owners have an issue with it if it's not impacting their bottom line. So if we're bad, it doesn't matter if we're bad, if we're the second worst team in the league or if we're the 8th worst team in the league. If it doesn't have any impact on who shows up for our games attendance-wise, why wouldn't we make an effort to be the worst of the worst to get a better draft pick? So if we already know ahead of time business-wise that it's not going to have a negative impact on our bottom line, why not take the chance to make our team have a better option of getting a better player?
Dennis.
Well, and it's worse in the NBA than anywhere else because one player can make the largest difference in the NBA than anywhere else.
Right. So if you get that top 1 or 2 draft pick, that if you get, well, I mean, they kind of did an unusual thing, but if you get Larry Bird or Michael Jordan or Hakeem Olajuwon or LeBron James, the next best guy may not be anywhere.
And remember,
near.
Michael Jordan was third.
Yes, but yeah,
a lot of these, I think it's also worse too because the GMs now in the NBA, to understand the salary cap in general, have to be unbelievably educated,
or have somebody who is,
or hire somebody who is. But you have to understand that salary cap situation so well. But so many of them figured out years ago that if I'm going to trade a first-round draft pick, I'm going to attach protection to it. And a lot of these first-round draft pick trades now are 1 through 5 protected or 1 through 3 protected, which means if I trade you a first-round draft pick and whatever the transaction is, as long as that draft pick falls 1, 2, or 3 in the draft, I keep that pick. Well, so many of these picks now are traded with those protections on them. There's a greater incentive not to be the 8th worst team or the 6th worst team. I have to make sure I'm bad enough that I'm one of the 3 worst teams to keep my draft pick. So that's a greater incentive to trade for guys who are hurt, or to take on bad contracts and sit guys or buy them out.
I want to come back to what you mentioned earlier. The idea Mark Cuban was expressing, kind of what you were saying. Say, look, what fans really care about. And I think he was saying, I don't think he was saying fans don't care at all about winning, but I think he's saying, look, they care about the experience, they care about the environment. I thought about that. I thought, well, and in fact, in Major League Baseball, and just kind of dropped the last day or two, the Angels owner was saying something somewhat similar, but I thought, well, it's interesting you're saying that, Art, because I'm guessing before the last year or two, you paid no attention to Indiana football. And now he's all about Indiana football. And when you're the doormat, I think there is, I would say, again, we could kind of debate this some, but I think there is a correlation between viewership and attendance and winning. Now, how big of a difference between finishing 8th worst and worst? But we see it certainly in sports like baseball. If you're bad, if you're really bad, I mean, you could have, they'll say there were 5,000 people at the game. You look at the stands, it looked like there were 1,500 people at the game. And so, look, I think it's worthwhile to say winning isn't the only thing that matters to fans, but clearly winning, now it is true. Fans look ahead and we want that draft pick and we're willing to, in the NFL, I don't get it because it isn't, the difference between picking 8th and 11th isn't that enormous in the NFL. Right. So these sites and these analysts, they're we need to be tanking games. But as a league, I think you really do want to disincentivize tanking. I mean, it's just not, like I forgot it, Utah, they were noting, they figured out, hey, the league will fine us if we don't start guys, so we'll play till the 4th quarter, and then no matter what the score is, we're pulling guys. Well, you don't want that. That's going against the whole idea of competition in the league, Dennis.
So 2 things with Mark Cuban's there. One, I agree that fans in the NBA tend to be quite tolerant, like you're saying here. But second, it almost, when in his interview, made it sound like he was in favor of encouraging tanking. Like, this is a good thing. And I disagree completely that that's true. That in essence, his point was that as long as the fans believe that in the long run you're trying to improve, they're willing to allow you to suck now. And careful. I think that's partially true. I don't know. Again, that has to do with some loyalty factors, but don't push fans' loyalty. You'll find out how loyal they can be to something else very quickly.
Well, so, and I will just chuck in there too. You get this dissonance between what might be good for one team is not necessarily good for the league too. All
right. So for how do we remedy this? I'm messing it up probably, but there's a PhD student a couple years ago named Poole. I think Poole is his last name. I'm sorry. I apologize if I'm missing it. But he came up with an idea, and it's now being implemented obscurely in the Women's Professional Hockey League. Okay, they're implementing this, and the concept is the draft order is determined by, in essence, a point system. It is a reverse order, but you get points based upon when you're eliminated from the playoffs. You start accumulating points based on your performance. So if I'm eliminated and I win a game, I get points towards drafting. And so it's the best teams given when they're eliminated. Now, really bad teams get eliminated earlier, so they have a longer time to accumulate points, right? Teams that are on the bubble of making the playoffs will get eliminated very late, so they don't have much time to accumulate points. But it prevents them from tanking the rest of the way to make sure that you stay, or the ones that get eliminated first stay the worst. They want them to continue to compete and be better, and so the more points you accumulate then determines what the draft order. So the one who gets most eliminated points gets the first draft pick.
Craig and I were discussing, texting back and forth about an idea that was kind of a simplified version of this. In some ways, it sounds really cool. Craig's comment about this even more simplified version was, I'll let you say it, the simplified version was, right, to some point in the season, we determine, your eligibility to be in the draft pool. And then once you're in that draft pool, now how much you win determines. And determining exactly when in the season you would want to put that, because you're always at risk of saying, well, you're just going to push back when teams start trying to be bad. I mean, it's one of the dilemmas here. There's always a trade-off to these solutions. But your comment about that, Greg, I'll let you state it.
Well, first, I thought it was difficult to follow for the average fan because Windhorse's, who we're talking about from ESPN, Brian Windhorse's system was, once a certain part of the season hits, you basically determine who's in the playoffs and who's in the draft. That was his approach. And his proposal was at the All-Star break, that's when the break in the season is. And then the teams that are in the playoffs are in the playoffs, and these other 14 teams, you start flip-flopping what they have. Wins count as losses, losses count as wins. And that's how you keep track of. So there's an incentive at the end of the year. The more you lose, the worse you are, because it increases your win category, which to me, one, is just unbelievably convoluted to follow as a fan.
Yeah.
But the problem here is you're saying a third of your regular season doesn't matter to make the playoffs, because if you implement this at the All-Star break, that's game 52, 53, 54. You still got a third of your season left. So you've already established your playoffs 2/3 of the way through the regular season, which again is kind of difficult for your fans to follow along and determine, okay, if I'm at game 52, my team is 2 games out of the playoffs, but we're already eliminated for the year, and now we're just trying to play for a draft pick. So it sounded simple, but even in his calculations and how it went, and this is his calculations, not mine, he had teams based on his system at the end of the year who had better records, quote unquote records, with this system than teams that were in the playoffs. So I don't know how you present this to the average fan watching. The Sixers, by the way, went from having the 3rd worst record in the league in the East to being the 6th seed in the playoffs with this system. So again, there are some drawbacks.
Yeah,
it sounds like sounds like you're taking the current method and turn the current method of determining what the season means and turning it on its head at that point, right?
Yeah.
I will say, I've mentioned to Greg, it's not exactly the same. There are differences that may matter, but what was the 1981 Major League Baseball season? Because the strike was broken into 2 parts, and look, it wasn't really that difficult to follow, but it did lead to some injustice in the eyes of Reds fans or Rangers fans. I think the Rangers had the best overall between the 2 parts of the season, had the best record in the American League, and missed out on the playoffs because they finished 2nd. Right. I think
the Reds were in the exact same situation.
Yeah, and so look, there are always trade-offs. The thing about this, I guess,
but in that case, it was a very specialized situation, right? That's because they had this work stoppage in the middle type thing. Again, it messed up, and I agree that wasn't the best method. They were trying to come up with a method meant somebody was going to get. But now you're going to try and implement something that on a regular basis you're going to have this type of
Now I will say this about that though, the 9th team is out, the 8th team. However you determine those at the end of the season, mid-season, but in many ways that's almost the worst place to be under the current system. Just make the playoffs or just miss the playoffs, you're in no man's land. And that's partly why teams tank. Right. So we want to get a lot worse, or we want to get, look, because in basketball, unless you've had an injury issue or something where, we were not very good and then LeBron gets healthy, the 8th team isn't going very far, the structure of the playoffs. So, but I guess
I could make the same argument about the 5th place team as it turns out, in the NBA especially.
But I guess my point is that you have to face up to some trade-off, and the current trade-off I think is not a good one of incentivizing losing almost to me is the worst.
Well, we were mentioned earlier too. You brought up the point. I didn't even think about this. The idea that one player can make such a huge difference in the NBA. So that's part of the incentive here is to get the best player out of college might make a huge difference for us. But that also goes back to this idea that for the last 20 games of the year, if we're tanking, the impact on my attendance also is hugely, especially in the NBA, hugely dependent on who we're playing. So if we've got the Lakers coming in twice, we've got the Bucks coming in with Giannis, we've got the Rockets coming in with Durant, I'm not worried about my attendance. The two nights the Lakers that are coming into wherever, Atlanta, we're going to have a decent crowd. We're going to have the same crowd we've had even if we weren't taking, because we've got those marquee stars coming in. Yep. So they've incentivized it even more so to the point that it's not going to impact the bottom line. We've got those guys to sell tickets.
That's part of the reason I disagree with Mark Cuban and everything. That, like, yes, we're terrible, but do you know who's coming?
Right.
That's much of what people go to NBA games for. It's the star power. It's not necessarily the closeness of comp. They would rather their local team have the star power, but it's okay if the visiting team has it too. I got to see, fill in the blank. That's what they're going for.
To me, the much bigger issue is the game management, whatever they call it now, the sitting guys during the regular season, where your LeBrons, your Durants are only playing 65 games a year because they're going through the load management, I think is the term they use for it. So I'm a fan in Atlanta, and I want to see LeBron play, and they come one time, and the night they play in Atlanta is the night they choose to sit him. Yep. That to me is a much bigger issue as a fan than the tank.
A huge issue.
Made me. Charles Barkley has been pretty funny on these things, about talking about, NBA players making $50 million a year and complaining about playing 2 nights in a row. I mean, come on. Now, granted, from just standpoint, are you always going to get your best product, even if guys are out there, if guys are tired? Well, no. But in fact, he was pretty funny. He was talking about hockey. He was talking about the Olympic hockey. He goes, some guy got 75 stitches and was back in the game. He goes, guy in the NBA gets 75 stitches. He's retiring.
The guy who scored the gold medal game lost 3 parts of 3 teeth, didn't miss a shift the rest of the game, and scored the game winner, as it turns out.
Now, I do sometimes question the sense of these guys. I would be wearing mouth protection.
Well, that's a different discussion. But yes, face protection in hockey, I would think is a good thing. So anyway.
You also made me remember, I was going to ask you about this. Well, or make a mention of this. Watching the hockey, I this week, just because of the hockey tournament, I went back and watched a YouTube replay, or at least parts of it, of the 1980 Miracle on Ice. And it is amazing the difference that digital, high-resolution, large-screen TV makes to the viewing experience. I mean, you can really watch where the puck is. And just, one thing I did want to ask you, well, I'll ask you that off camera. I don't think viewers sort of care about that.
Hold on. It had to do with hockey. Everybody
cares. It's this. You would agree once I tell you. One of the things I want to bring up, I mean, we're in the football off-season here, but there are always football things to talk about. But one of the things following on Indiana's championship is, where is the SEC in football? We're an SEC country. I grew up in Southwest Conference country, Big 8 country, but eventually was converted to going, wait a minute. Once I went to games at the SEC, I thought, okay, this is a different level. and from, I think, 2006 to 2022, SEC won, I think, I could have miscounted, but I think all but 3 of the national championships.
Sounds right.
And since then, though, they haven't had a team in it. And, this year they didn't have a team in the semis. Last year they had 1 team in the semis. Certainly, I've made the argument, as most people would, the SEC has been better over the last 20 years than the Big Ten by a sizable stretch. I've continued making the point, well, okay, at the top, maybe the Big Ten has equaled or gotten better, but the bottom, the mid and bottom, going to South Carolina is different than going to Purdue in terms of, trying to win a game. But I will say it's hard after a year or two. Teams are up and down. But has the SEC? Well, obviously, it has lost a step. What is this something that's now you expect going forward, or you think this is a temporary blip?
I think it's a natural progression of going to more teams in the playoffs. There's a greater chance that your SEC teams are not going to win the national title. There are more teams, and maybe IU was better. Maybe Ohio State's been better. Maybe Michigan was better, 3 years ago for their championship than the other teams in the SEC. But before that, you had a limited number of teams that were available to compete. And football's different than all other sports. You more frequently see the better team win, but it doesn't always happen. So when you've got 12 teams involved, and if we ever get to 16 or 24, whatever they're trying to get, that's just more chances for the best teams to get beat early on or in the semifinals. And I'm not saying the SEC has been the best teams.
No,
the last few years,
right.
It doesn't look like they have been.
I think your point is valid, but these last 3 years, I'm not sure that really explains.
Right. I'm not sure they've been the best teams. But if they're the only ones in it and they only have to win 2 games and you've got 2 out of the 4 teams are SEC teams, you're going to have a better chance to get a chance.
Look, I'm an SEC supporter and fan of.
Apologist?
Yes, and to almost to a fault sometimes. But I think it's a good thing. One, that dominance can't go on forever. That's bad for football to start with. So the fact that if the SEC is taking a step back, good. I think that's a good thing. In the realm of NIL, I think that's not only good, but probably what we would have all predicted, that the SEC couldn't stay at the lunatic fringe of complete dominance like they had been, because now backup players aren't going to stay on your roster, right? They're going somewhere else. They're going to leave. And so depth issues are going to matter. Who stays healthy is going to matter. All of these type of things, much bigger issues now than they ever had been for SEC type of schools, right? And other schools that have money, whoever it comes from, Mark Cuban decides that Indiana football is going to be good. I'm not saying that this is why they were good, because I still can't get my head around the fact that they are any good. But somebody like that steps up. Texas Tech might be a better example, right?
Yeah.
Some billionaire oil guys decide, hey, I want Tech to be good, and throws a whole bunch of money at it. Well, you know what? That's South Carolina might not be able to match that. And
I guess the question then would be, in terms of this Big Ten SEC, is that, well, the Big Ten doesn't seem to that has propped up Indiana, but Ohio State's still in the mix, and well, not so much Michigan. Maybe not. Well, so maybe my point is valid there. But let me
Michigan, Penn State, Ohio State, and now Indiana thrown into the mix. Those are very good football programs, and again, they're alternating and everything.
Well,
but the depth of that, once you get below that, I mean, now you have. Well, how good is Iowa relative to
Washington?
Yeah,
or
I guess the West Coast
Oregon,
teams now, the Oregon and SCs and Washington.
Let me add this. I think part of this explanation would be that at the top you're dealing with small numbers. So if it hasn't been like, well, every team in the SEC has been winning championships. It's been Alabama, Georgia, before that Florida, LSU, and so
Auburn.
Right, Auburn jumped up.
We got a couple of them too.
Right, but still, if you take out, let's say, Georgia, Alabama are 2. If you're really going to be in the mix, you're going to count on them regularly being in the mix, or LSU. Well, Saban stepping away from Alabama had a, as we call it in economics, a negative shock to So the small numbers involved, you take a team like Alabama that diminishes, whether it's for 2 or 3 years or the next 10 years, that makes a difference, as well as LSU. It'll be interesting what Lane Kiffin can do, because you do see what you said, even in the SEC. I mean, the one team from the SEC that came closest to making the semis was Ole Miss, because of Kiffin's NIL efforts there. And so that as you diminish, it'll be interesting going forward. Is it going to be a case that you're going to see more of the IU type schools doing what they did, or I'm so sick of every year that Miami would win the first 2 or 3 games. Oh, the U is back. Well, they were actually, by the end of the year, I don't know how they lost to Louisville or another game, but by the end of the year, their defense was very, very good. And so will it be, clearly NIL is helping. They're doing a good job at Miami. And so individual schools can jump up. And on the flip side, Dabo Swinney at Clemson decided early on, I'm not into NIL. Well, guess what? You're not into winning either.
So did Mike Gundy.
Yes.
Those guys too, especially Swinney, he was anti-transfer portal. So that made a huge issue. When you start talking about not having the depth that they had at the SEC, it's so much easier for me as a player now. I might be playing in the SEC as a backup someplace and can go someplace else. You see so many of those kids doing that every year now. So that depth is just not going to be.
And I get, look, Swinney was, I want to build guys. I want to develop guys. Well, that's a good idea, but you gotta roll with the times. Back when I first started WKU had a very good group of players, got a different coach, and probably the best chance what WKU had to make the Final Four since 1971. Took the UNLV team that went to the Final Four that year in the preseason NIT, had a 20-point lead, lost that, took them to overtime. I mean, that was a good team. But the three-point shot was initiated that year, and the coach, who had success at UT Chattanooga, had been assistant in the NBA, he didn't like the three-point shot. He thought, well, you should work for good shots, not three-point shots. Well, over the course of the season, other teams figured out this is a weapon. In WKU, the season they won the league, but kind of petered out. They did okay in the tournament. Well, let me switch gears here. I'm going to lean, Craig and I are going to lean on Dennis a little bit. Let me just say, the Super Bowl, I may be forgetting particular plays, but it didn't seem like there was a play that everybody went, oh, that was just a terrible, terrible call. I mean, there were a couple of calls in the college football championship game. You thought, okay, that was questionable, but nothing just outrageous. But what you do see in football and other sports, we've talked about this in basketball, but Miami, Indiana did this too. Miami has copied pro football in that if our defensive backs, cornerbacks, if we hold you on every play, they're only going to call 3 or 4 holes at most in a game on the defensive backs. And this is known in game theory as, by the slang term, salami tactics, breaking down a rule not by egregious violations of the rule, but by small increments. Well, what if I grab you like this? Well, okay, well, you can't call that. Well, what if I grab you like this? Well, that's still, and when you hear announcers, analysts go, well, I just don't think there was enough there. That's an admission that there was stuff there. But again, it's an admission that these teams get better and better at gaming the system. And it's a dilemma, and I want to bring this up. Dennis has, in the last 2 or 3 years, jumped into the officiating world at the high school and middle school level. And I don't know how much this sort of thing crops up. So a couple of questions. First, what would you say you've learned about officiating that maybe you didn't appreciate as much before you got into it? I mean, in the U.S., many people love to rail on officials more than I think they like rooting for their team. It's become like an American tradition, maybe a European one too, in soccer.
Yeah. But well, from what Dennis has told me, he hasn't heard the crowd yet. You've never heard the crowd say anything, correct?
Other than the mother and the during a football game that told me, said, he's traveling. I was like, I think that's the wrong sport.
So Dennis, what?
Look, the big difference here is angles matter. And it turns out that we're so used to watching what the camera angles are and seeing what those things are, that's what, and you can see things all over the field type thing. When you're on ground level and looking at things and you're, behind people or beside people, you're right next to them. I mean, within 5-10 yards of them, what you see is not really as clear as it seems like on television.
Sure.
And then secondly, it's happening in real time 10 yards in front of you. You don't get an instant replay. You don't get to see it. And so the speed at which things happen, and again, I'm just on the high school level, it's so much faster, infinitely faster on the college level, and infinitely faster than that on the pro level. The speed and the angle in which you're looking at things is just not the same as being a fan. That's for sure.
That just sounds like excuses.
Yes, it is.
No, this is
and the fact that I really don't know the rule book well enough. That's another thing that's really hurting me as well. So
no, I mean, this is one of the reasons I bring this up is that, look, there's certainly a difference across leagues over time, over decades, in the degree of accountability and review of officiating, the degree of professionalism, how much individuals are permitted their own discretion, and the filter process. But still, I resist, often fans, I think because of their zeal for their team, they want to attribute, well, these guys, they don't like fill in the blank. They don't like the Patriots. They don't like the Cowboys. They don't like the Lakers. And I'm thinking, okay, look, attributing, missed calls to bias. Now, look, you can find in sports, we've seen this. Is there a little bit of home bias that can be detected at times in officiating? Well, yeah, I mean, as in the Olympics, even in the judging, they say, well, look, these people are human beings, even if they're not just outwardly, openly, try to help their skater, they're not immune from the crowd reaction. I mean, but again, that's a small effect and one that is not based on favoring a particular team. It's just based on who's the home team. But let me get back to this question, and I'll give another example. Pro football now often on replays, you'll hear the replay, expert chiming in, well, yeah, they were both hand fighting there. And I'm thinking, well, again, if I'm a defender and I'm start grabbing your hands, what's the offensive player to do? Just let you hold them? Well, maybe if you want to increase the odds of getting that one or two extra holding calls a game, but if you want to increase the chances of actually catching the ball, and so they don't seem to recognize that, well, who initiates this does matter. But how do you, again, in game theory, there are countermeasures for salami tactics, but what would you suggest, Dennis, for how pro football, because again, this has risen up and followed back with the years. In the late 1990s, early 2000s, the Ravens defense, Miami's defense, Titans defense, I mean, they were masters at holding. The league cracked down, and then it creeps back up. The league cracks down a little bit. Is that just what you have to live with? Is some way?
Boy, I don't know. It's in essence the question of how do you save college basketball? Because I think we've had this discussion that college basketball seems almost unwatchable relative to what it used to be. Like there's no freedom of movement. Anybody who moves has got to get bumped, got to get grabbed, got to get clutched. I mean, you got to
two
pull
of the
on their
best
arms.
teams, Michigan and Duke, played Saturday, ranked first and third, and the final score was 68-63. So that's proving your 100% point. Two of the best offensive teams in the nation couldn't break 70.
And again, it's part of this that if I commit 30 fouls, they're going to call 20 of them. But if I commit 120 fouls, they're going to call 30 of them. So at some point, I can get away with a whole lot of stuff if I just do it on a regular basis. Mm-hmm. How does college basketball get rid of that? I got to be honest, I don't even know anymore. It seems like it's gone so far, I don't know. How does football keep this kind of thing? The problem with football is that every play has the opportunity to run it in slow motion, to break it down. And in college football, they've made it so much worse because they are willing to go to instant replay on every play. if necessary, to make sure whether or not the nose of the ball might have touched. Did it move in his hands? Like,
even,
you know what? Just move it on and just assume the players aren't perfect, the coaches aren't perfect, the officials not perfect. It won't be perfect, but there'll be some flow and there'll be some randomness in what happens in the outcome.
Now we're hearing from the official from us.
No.
But I agree in terms of the review process and whether this was or wasn't. But this is kind of a separate issue of how to, apart from replay and whether that was a good call or a bad call, as a league dealing with, how do we limit being so physical? It's interesting.
My point being here is that whenever you're willing to scrutinize some things but not other things, then you're going to put a lot of emphasis on was he really holding or kind of holding? That's the analysis you put, instead of saying, look, there's going to be some randomness and people will make mistakes. Move on to the next play.
But again, this isn't. I think maybe my point though isn't about making mistakes. This is about, as a league, where if we want the level of freedom of movement to be here, in college basketball or in passing game in NFL, how do we achieve that through officiating? And I think the countermeasure here is one that's. The problem is it's not easy to stick with, because you say, okay, does that mean we're going to call 10 defensive holding calls in the league? Well, that's the problem, that the teams and coaches know the league doesn't really want to do that. And I think it would be easier to say, look, you lay your hands on the guy past 5 yards, it's holding. But it's not easy to stick to that rule,
The old approach used to be, and I say old approach, probably when I didn't play football. I'm speaking from the basketball perspective. The old approach used to be call it early in the game, and your players will adjust throughout. So establish early, first quarter, establish how you're going to call the game. The trouble is the NFL has done exactly the opposite. And I always go back. I know you're an Eagles fan, and you take up for them. And you say if it's holding, it's holding. You have to call it. And you are actually being a very good Eagles fan. In saying that,
that's not a.
I know that's an oxymoron actually, but the idea that what happened in that Super Bowl game where they called a holding penalty on Philadelphia with 30 seconds to go, whatever, that really did change the game. My argument was, and I've expressed this before, that holding penalty happened 40 times in that game, and they only chose to call it at the end. You reverse that, call it as much as you can early, players will adapt some. Well, it's gotten to the point where if you call 10 in the first quarter, there's still going to be 10 in the second quarter, and they're going to be 10 in the third quarter, because teams know you're not going to call 40 holding penalties a game. Right.
Yeah, the other thing is there's this media pressure, too. I mean, that, it's one of our older colleagues used to say, he really, and I dislike this, too, really dislike it when you hear some ex-player or whoever go, wow, they need to just let it play. Well, like he was saying, what does that even mean? Does that mean punch each other in the face? I mean, even those people would, you would think, still have bound. The question is, where are you going to put the boundaries? And then letting the play, plays into the hands of, becoming more and more physical and harder to watch. It's not like you said, as teams know what your preferences are, we prefer not. Yeah, we want to cut down on defensive holding or physical play, but we also don't want to call 40 fouls, and we don't foul out half the team, or that then coaches gain that knowledge, and it is a dilemma.
And it from the league's perspective, you're really putting the emphasis on your officials. If you're not telling them you've got to call it every time it happens, you're really making them a part of the game. And it's no fair to the official to say, well, okay, if you don't call it early, you can't call it late. Well, if I call it late, then I've got to call it early too. And it goes back to this argument of, well, if I call it early and then I call it throughout the game and then I miss one late in the game, they're going to say I was
well, yeah, in fact, that's I was just going to say that becomes, because of the arbitrariness that you call 1 in 20 of these, it really then lends itself. Well, see,
Exactly.
they were doing this, and they just don't like,
Well, I think what you have to do is, in essence, what the NFL did a long time ago. That at one point in the 1970s and stuff like that, there really was no protection for wide receivers down the field. They could get
Mel
held anywhere.
Bloods of the world, from Pittsburgh, would just hammer guys.
Yeah, just holding and blocking them all the way up and down the field. And so they said, all right, we got this 5-yard buffer, and then after that, you can't do a certain number of things. But that's gotten more laxed. If they decided to tighten those rules and said, look, there's no contact whatsoever initiated by the defensive player past this, well, okay, well, that's a lot easier thing to make a judgment
easier
call
for you
on.
to officiate.
Yeah, from an official standpoint.
weird thing
make it
is-
sound like I'm any good at this. I suck at this. I just letting everybody know while I've done it, I'm terrible.
The weird thing about it is in the NFL, certain routes, they are, and like if the slot corner or linebacker, with the tight end makes some option route one way or the other, and the guy kind of hooks his waist. That's like, because I think there's one guy back there that's his only job. I'm calling that.
Yeah.
Well, that's the college basketball equivalent of you can tear a guy's jersey off as he drives to the basket and not get a foul called. But if he's 50 feet away from the basket and you put both hands on him, it's an automatic whistle. He touched him with two-hand touch is an automatic foul.
Yeah.
Right? He didn't have any contact other than just and that's an automatic foul. So that's the same thing you're saying. We've gotten to the point where the officials are looking for individual specific things instead of calling the game based on the rule book.
Let me ask you, at the high school level, is there any of this kind of gaming? Is it sophisticated enough for coaches to go, okay, we're going to take advantage of holding or some other?
I'm sure there is. Again, I'm too much of a noob to really get the sense of that. But even amongst the officials, they'll tell you, yes, call this, no, don't call that type of thing. So if a wide receiver was being held, say I
knew you were cheating. Sorry.
If the team in the white is holding, that's good. So that's not quite. But if like a play is rolls to the far side of the field and there's holding on a wide receiver on the near side of the field, like, look, don't throw that. It's not really part of the play. Short of, if you're holding me, that's one thing, and they're not going to throw it. But if you then grab me and throw me to the ground, that's an escalate. Now that becomes a foul, right? So you can hold, you can't hold too much. And so there's this weird, like, well, yeah, you don't call that. But if you throw him to the ground, that's a penalty anywhere on the field type thing.
Well,
so.
it speaks to the idea. I think even coaches understand this about leagues. And when this happens a game, everybody complains, well, man, there were 30 flags thrown in this game. The officials just are stop the game left and right. Well, nobody wants that. And so some of this is a rational response on the part of leagues or officials to say, okay, nobody wants
Right.
that. In fact, that's one of the things you'll often hear analysts like, that call had nothing to do with the play, Now, it's tricky when you're talking about passing game and, part of the reason maybe the quarterback didn't look over here was because that guy was me.
Well, and you got college football games now that are 3 and 3.5 hours long. And if we're going to start calling all the penalties that occur, you're talking about a 4 to 4.5 hour.
They could get
game.
some more commercials in if they just throw some more penalties.
Yeah. Right. Have commercial.
The marketing guy will keep his mouth shut.
Every penalty, like, well, it's time to see what Colgate thinks of this.
Well, and that's the situation I was reading last night. The college football supposedly is going to review the targeting fouls and how it's implemented and whether or not they're kicked out for the next game and things like that. And my thought process, since the targeting has become focused the last few years, is officials are calling it less because they know as soon as they call it, it's going to be an automatic review, and we've got 5 minutes to go through. And whether they're being told or not, I'm convinced the officials are being told, you got to be sure this is targeting, because if it's not, that's another 5 minutes we're going to spend under the hood or whatever.
Well,
we're talking about reviewing it.
And when you make penalties so severe, it's like in soccer. When you give penalty kicks, officials recognize the whole game can hinge on this. And so it actually diminishes the likelihood of guys calling a holding in the penalty area. No, it's it's an interesting problem. I don't know.
But even if the league comes down and changes the rules and makes a more strict clarification, that means the referees still have to make the calls and be willing to stick by making a lot of these calls, even though all the fans are going to complain because last year that wasn't a call, this year it is a call. And you have to make a lot of them, and not just early in a game, but early in a season. You make a lot during the early of the season and hope the players adjust so you don't have to call them later.
We've had that discussion with college basketball where year after year in the teens, they made the emphasis, we're going to start calling fouls. And you had games that had 70, 80 free throws. And by Christmas or by January, they were completely called differently for the rest of the season.
It turns out that the coaches and the teams outlasted the officials.
Right.
The officials said, we're going to do this. And then the officials tapered off, not the players and the coaches.
The teams were committed to continuing to foul.
This is going to be our strategy.
And they knew college basketball commentators and fans and everybody else would complain about there being 80 fouls in a game, and eventually it would back off.
A great example to use, Dennis teaches sometimes class in game theory, is a great example of breaking down commitments. That's how you do it, right? Well, thank you for listening or watching this month. We'll be back with you in March.